The chandeliers in the Willard Academy graduation hall shimmered like frozen drops of gold, their light spilling across rows of white chairs dressed in satin ribbons. The air was thick with the sound of polite laughter, rustling programs, and the occasional click of high heels on marble as latecomers hurried to their seats. Outside, the June sky was a perfect watercolor of blue and white, but inside, the world revolved around the stage where the graduating class of one of the country's most elite private schools waited to take their final bow before stepping into the future. Daniel Carter stood off to the side, half hidden by a pillar near the service entrance, as he always did during school events. His navy blue janitor's uniform was clean, but it didn't have the crisp lines of the tailored suits in the crowd. The uniform was his armor, it made him invisible, a part of the building rather than the people in it. A worn broom rested against the wall beside him, and in his hands, he held a folded rag, though he wasn't cleaning anything at the moment. He simply stood there, quietly watching. In 5 years at Willard, Daniel had seen dozens of these ceremonies. He'd mopped the stage before the diplomas were laid out, carried stacks of folding chairs up from the basement, and swept up confetti long after the last limousine had driven away. It was always the same, perfect speeches from perfect students to perfect parents. The applause, the handshakes, the photographs, none of it had anything to do with him. Not that it mattered. This job wasn't his dream. It wasn't even close. But it kept a roof over his head and food in his stomach. It was steady work, and when you'd been through what Daniel had, steady meant survival. 5 years ago, he'd been Daniel Carter, history lecturer at a small but respected college in Ohio. He had a wife, Marissa, and a little girl named Lily who loved bedtime stories about knights and queens. They weren't rich, but they were happy. Until the night everything cracked apart. A drunk driver blew through a red light, and in an instant, Marissa was gone. Daniel survived, but the hospital bills devoured what little savings they had. Worse still, grief hollowed him out so badly he lost his job, his home, and eventually, temporarily, custody of Lily. The court had called him financially unstable and given custody to Marissa's sister until he could prove otherwise. He came to Willard because it was the only job that called him back after weeks of rejection. Mopping the floors of a private academy for the children of the wealthy wasn't what he imagined for himself, but he took it. Every paycheck went toward rent, bills, and the legal process of getting his daughter back. That was his life. Work. Save. Wait. The students barely noticed him, except to ask for paper towels if a drink spilled. The teachers nodded politely but rarely used his name. Most parents didn't even see him. Except for one. Sophia Hartwell. Daniel had first noticed her 3 years ago, in her sophomore year. It was late one winter afternoon, and the hallways were empty except for him and the sound of his mop swishing across the tiles. He'd heard a faint sound coming from the auditorium, not the bright laughter of a rehearsal or the hum of music, but the muffled sobs of someone trying not to be heard. He found her sitting alone in the third row, her school blazer folded neatly beside her, her head bowed. She was clearly trying to compose herself, but the tear stains on her cheeks betrayed her. Daniel wasn't one to intrude. Still, something in the quiet misery on her face struck him. Without saying much, he'd walked down the aisle, pulled a clean tissue from his pocket, and set it on the seat beside her. "You're stronger than whatever made you cry today," he'd said simply, then turned to leave. She hadn't spoken then, just looked up with wide, glassy eyes. There had been no thank you, no conversation. But later, he sometimes caught her looking at him in the hallways with a faint, knowing nod, as if they shared a secret no one else could see. After that, their exchanges were rare but sincere. She would greet him in the mornings when most students walked past as if he were furniture. Sometimes, she'd leave a coffee cup in the trash with a folded napkin inside, on it, a small handwritten "thank you" in blue ink. Still, Daniel never imagined she thought much of him. Which was why, when Sophia took the stage as valedictorian that June morning, he didn't expect anything more than a well-rehearsed speech about ambition and perseverance. From where he stood in the shadows, he could see her perfectly, tall, poised, with a cascade of dark hair framing her pale face. She wore her cap tilted just so, the gold tassel brushing her cheek when she moved. Her voice was confident, her smile easy. She spoke about the lessons of the past 4 years, about friendship and late-night studying, about the pressure to excel. Parents leaned forward, nodding. Students smiled, some misty-eyed. Then, halfway through, she paused. It was the kind of pause that made people lift their heads, sensing something unscripted. Her eyes scanned the crowd. They passed over the front row, where her father, Raymond Hartwell, the billionaire CEO of Hartwell Industries, sat with his usual expression of polite detachment. They passed over the rows of teachers and classmates. Then they stopped. On him. "I want to thank someone who isn't on this stage," she said, her voice steady but carrying a strange, personal weight. "Someone who doesn't wear a cap and gown. Someone whose name, I'm sure, most of you don't even know. But this person has taught me more about strength and resilience than any textbook ever could." The crowd shifted uneasily. Heads turned in the direction she was looking. "That man," she said, lifting her hand and pointing toward the side of the hall. Directly at Daniel. A murmur rippled through the audience. Daniel's breath caught. "Mr. Carter," she continued. "He's been our janitor for the last 5 years. You've probably walked past him hundreds of times without noticing him. I almost did, too. But one day, when I was at my lowest, he saw me. He didn't ask for details, didn't judge me, he just told me I was stronger than whatever I was going through. I don't think he knew how much those words mattered. But they did. They stayed with me. Through exams. Through competitions. Through nights I thought I couldn't go on." Her voice grew firmer. "Today, I graduate at the top of my class. And while I've had great teachers, supportive friends, and parents who gave me opportunities, I want everyone to know that one of the most important people in my journey was the man who cleans these floors. The man you don't clap for at the end of the day. Mr. Carter, you reminded me that my worth isn't measured by trophies or titles, but by how I keep going when it's hard. Thank you." Silence. Pure, heavy silence. Raymond Hartwell's face was unreadable, but his eyes flicked toward Daniel with something like curiosity, or perhaps calculation. The principal looked awkward, as though unsure how to respond to the deviation from the polished program. Then, slowly, someone began to clap. Another joined in. Within seconds, the entire hall was applauding, not politely, but with genuine force. Students turned in their seats to look at him. Daniel's throat tightened. He wanted to vanish into the shadows, but he couldn't move. He nodded once, awkwardly, and in that instant, for the first time in years, he felt seen. He didn't know it yet, but that moment. Sophia's words, her courage to say them in front of the most powerful people in the room, would change everything.